Hi, everyone.
Hi.
So, hoping there's Natalia here as well, but Natalia, maybe you can see, but we can't see you. Nevertheless, I'm going to carry on, just because I'm aware that there may be technical problems and there's limited time. It's absolutely lovely to see you all here. Here she is. Hi, Natalia.
Hello.
Hi. I think there are a few more people watching that won't be on screen, but that's absolutely fine. I'm going to pin myself and go straight into my presentation. I'm right here in my studio in London, and when I woke up this morning, it was an absolutely glorious summer day, but because I'm in the basement with no windows, I don't see any of that. Nevertheless, I'm looking forward to going outside afterwards. What I'm going to do here is share my screen in a minute to show you some. You have that from my workshop memorial photo booth, which follows this talk. In this talk, I'm going to talk to you about my ongoing body of work, Songs of Lamentations. But I hope you won't mind first if I tell you a bit about my practice as an artist, as it really provides the context for the evolution of this body of work. And for many years, my practice has dealt with observations and expressions about faith systems and ritual. And I was brought up in a Catholic family, and some of my earlier work deals with some traditions and doctrines associated, such as confessions, miracles, pilgrimage, martyrdom, etc. Now, my creative praxis is perhaps much more clearly defined and focus, and there's a reason for that, which I'll come on to, focuses largely on the examination of ideas around memorialization, death, grief, loss, memory, and remembrance. And I use analog and digital image capture in my process, such as photography, which I refer to as image capture, gravure etching, projection, camera obscura, and my tendency is to use found and recovered photographic prints and negatives. So I don't really describe myself as a photographer, although I do take photographs. I tend to appropriate them, let's say. And I'm really fascinated by the photographic medium, possibly because my family didn't take photographs when we were growing up. My parents didn't have a camera, unbelievably. In the 60s, everybody had a camera, albeit a film camera. And consequently, there are almost no photographs of myself and my siblings as children. And that sort of thing, I think, these days kind of plays havoc with memory and makes you question, in this time when we're absolutely saturated and over, what is the truth of that experience if there is no photographic evidence to prove it? I have a master's in fine art printmaking from the University of London, and really this was a very pivotal time for me in my practice. I wouldn't have that's what it was. In the months of my sister was diagnosed with a very fast-growing and aggressive brain tumour, and the prognosis from the start was, well, actually it was terminal. She was never going to get any better, and I think really because of that, our grieving began. Unsurprisingly, she survived for 4 months before she died in a hospice at 40, very, very young. And this catastrophic event really sent shockwaves through me and for my family and all of her friends. Really continued. And perhaps predictably, this event changed the direction of my work, and I became very preoccupied with the ephemeral nature of existence and those unanswerable musings about death and afterlife and the soul. Where do dead people go? Is there enough room for them? And is there a soul? What will look like? And what the feedback really is about collections and the archive. This is really, and I want to talk about this because it is really central to my practice, and something I've reflected on for many years, actually. And I often use these collections often consist of found photographic images, and I'm very drawn to what is revealed in the multiple, the sort of cohesive wholeness that is only revealed collections of things together. So I'm just going to share my screen now and show you some of my work, if you'll bear with me. I'm really hoping this is going to work. Okay, I'm really hoping that everyone can see this. Could you just let me know if you can?
Yes, yeah. We can see it. I can see it.
Excellent. Okay, and so I'm going to then just talk to you and talk around a few images here, if you will. So over the last decade or so, I have created a significant number of things that belong to collections and archives, if you like. And this is one which is called A Little and this is 365 screenshots, the front page of The Guardian, taken each day for a calendar year in 2016. And it's the accumulation of these images and the spaces in between that you can see. And these are the days that I forgot or wasn't able to take the screenshot, which forms this unreadable and sort of coded message. And this abstract image remains, and it is suggested, but perhaps not explicit, but it perhaps triggers memories of that year for many people, for many reasons. This is part of a collection of lists and lists of thousands and thousands of the spam names that appeared in my junk email every day. And I wrote them, I transcribed them methodically in a found notebook each day. And I think it's worth saying here that the better digital security has meant that these no longer appear in the same quantity in our junk mail, which is a good thing. So this work has become a memorial in its own right. There was a time when I literally had 20 or 30 a day. And that some of them are very beautiful names. One of my favorite is Price, but they are manufactured names, and documenting these names sort of as a fleeting moment, if you like, in the recent history of the internet. And around the same time, I was really fascinated by Robert Walser's microscripts. I don't know if you know about that, but Robert Walser was an 20th century novelist who wrote his manuscripts on tiny strips of paper while he was resident in a sanatorium. And his writing is no more than 1 or 2 millimeters high, and was initially thought to be some kind of secret code. It was not really legible to the human eye without magnification. But in fact, it turned out the microscripts were eventually discovered to be extremely form of a German script, and a whole story. He fitted a whole story on the back of effectively a business card, if you like, and these have been translated. But I was very captivated by the idea of actually writing something so microscopic that it really drew you in. So my collection of spam names was painstakingly transcribed in miniature with the aid of a magnifying lamp and a very steady hand, and applied to these decals on porcelain discs, sort of reminiscent of communion hosts, as decals, and fired in a fourth firing process. It was a very laborious process. And this work really is a memorial to the transience of life. And memorial inscriptions, they may be read like a prayer, if you like, or a sort of meditation on impermanence. And what we'll also do, as I say, is to a more intimate engagement with the work. So the viewer has to draw in to look closer and then make interpretations. And the names, of course, belong to no one and have no identity attached. That's the purpose of spam names. So I think of them as sort of lost souls. Original purpose is kind of malign. You want to take over your whatever, but there is no one to blame and no one to complain to or to communicate with. They're sort of living dead. And this transition from the virtual space, i.e. my junk box, to a sort of fragile physicality is a sort of act of substantiation, I see. And I am very interested in dimensionality and materiality, and I'm always looking for that deeper resonance and meaning through the media that I choose, through the materials that I choose, and the processes that I use that have some relevance to the subject matter that I'm dealing with. I'm going to talk to you a bit about this series of work, soul imaging, because the processes I used here are really have been really influential in my later work. So soul imaging, in this work I collected the images of some of the contestants from the Channel 4 series Big Brother, and which is actually quite a long time ago now. The Big Brother household at the time sort of exemplified a really interesting and unique moment in Western history, I think, a sort of societal collision in the ubiquity of the media, public confession and self-worship, and again a sort of diminishing importance of organised religion in Western society. And these original found images, which I found on the internet, were all very low resolution press shots taken from the internet. And I was really fascinated by the visceral and emotional, exaggerated expressions of sorrow, grief, and horror in the characters' faces, bearing in mind their expressions in response to Big Brother, the show. And it was really sort of, for me, reminiscent of Caravaggio paintings, that sort of chiaroscuro. And I thought I wanted to interrogate these faces to find some kind of soul in them. And I used various transitions of process from projection, from photography, the original low resolution photography, which I then projected, and then from projection through the lens of a camera obscura, and then from the lens of the camera obscura back to photography, and then eventually to print. So a lot of layering of process. And if you're wondering, I keep mentioning this camera obscura. If you don't know what it means, camera obscura literally means dark chamber. And the images are captured through the lens of exterior objects or images and onto a screen that is behind the light shield there. So that is a camera obscura. And the ones that I've used were antique or that I'd found secondhand on eBay, which had been sort of handmade. So there was a really nice sort of a handmadeness artifact about the camera obscura. These are some of the other soul images that you might or might not recognize. And then, so as a development of these ideas and interests that had really motivated my practice up until that point, I began to really think about and interrogate the most significant archive that I'd begun to create, which is a collection of found photographs. And these are portraits from gravestones and tombstones, mainly in cemeteries in Europe, but also in Brazil, where I lived for a while. And it's this collection of tombstone photographs that form the basis for my evolving body of work, Songs of Lamentation. So just to talk a bit about the notion of the photographic memorial. In many countries across the world, it's very common practice to display a photographic memorial of the deceased on the gravestone. You will have seen them in cemeteries and graveyards. And the popularity of these memorial photographs coincided with advances in technology in the late 19th century that enabled photographic images to be adhered permanently to the ceramic surface. So initially I began to apply these portraits as decals again on these porcelain communion hosts. And again, I should say this was a very laborious process in terms of labour and time. The firing process, it took 4 firings, and the final one was the application of the decal. So there's something about time and labour in my practice as well that's really important. And then I started thinking about this layering of process that I'd used in the soul imaging series to sort of further interrogate these images that I'd collected. But this time I added another iteration of process by creating gravure etching, another very laborious process, which relies on a combination of digital and analog image making, digital imagery translated onto individual etching plates, metal etching plates, each painstakingly inked up by hand and then wiped by hand and then printed by hand on an etching press. And these rounded corners that you see that are characteristic of this work are created by using a hand-cut mask out of tissue paper. So again, a very laborious and a process very open to error, unbelievably, because the work I want is to be very clean and pure. So I'm going to just slowly go through these images. And as I said, Songs of Lamentation is an ongoing project. It's one that I really feel has no end or conclusion, that it's like humankind and infinity in a way. It just keeps going on. Really, for me, it's an ongoing examination of death and a meditation on mortality, and really the nature of perception, how we perceive, and mostly about memorial and remembrance. So we know that the people in the images are anonymous. And I don't keep any record of names or ages or dates of death, all those sort of narrative clues that we see on gravestones. I don't record those, so I just really take the image. We know they've died. We know these people in these images have died because they were found on gravestones. But in a way, by representing them, they have somehow been re-remembered or reincarnated or resurrected. And they are somehow familiar as well. There's a sort of familiarity about them. And often the subject is looking straight into the camera, often in apparently confrontational or challenging way. It's as if they can see us or communicate with us, saying, we were once alive, we existed. And often people who've bought this work as prints tell me that the image has triggered a memory for them, or a sort of narrative that's very personal or unique to them. And the photographic medium, let's call it image capture, which is what I like to do, is really critical in this context. The photographic image isn't simply a faithful record of reality in this instance. It makes us really consider the reliability of memory. And remember, I talked about not having any images or photographs of us as children. So it makes us consider the reliability of our memory and the act of remembering associated with death and grief. And the development of the ceramic photographic memorial came not long after the invention of the daguerreotype, which was the earliest form of photography in the mid-19th century. And back then, death was a far more present possibility. By 1900, for example, life expectancy was about 47 for a man and about 50 for a woman. And death in childhood was extremely common, even in the early 20th century. And so thinking about back then, the outing to the photographer's studio, when photography itself was a new invention, wasn't a spur of the moment decision. So it's not the same now as in the way that we take a photograph now. There was all this preparation and perhaps emotional preparation. And due to the comparatively rudimentary nature of the medium by modern standards, the sitter was required to stay still for a very long time. So there was no immediacy, no deleting and reshooting and discarding. It was a very charged situation, knowing that this would be how they were remembered in perpetuity. What would the sitter wear? What jewellery? What hairstyle? Were there any coded messages or secret tacit communications? And I think these days, the pandemic has really pulled us up short, hasn't it? And brought our attention into the sharp perspective of finite life, of mortality. And then the memorial photograph was, and perhaps still is, the ultimate selfie. And arguably, it is in the photograph where life and death meet. In the memorial photograph, the person deceased was alive in the instant that their image was captured. Susan Sontag called photography the inventory of mortality, the taking stock of life and death. And she considered the photograph to be an invention of memory, not an instrument of memory or a replacement of memory, but an invention of memory, a sort of deceit, an effort of the imagination. And Roland Barthes tells us that that photographs have been linked with mortality ever since the camera was invented. The person present in the photograph is also absent. And we know that at the time of photography's emergence in the mid-19th century, it was often associated with communication with the dead, and the belief that a photograph could capture the soul of a person. That dates back to the very earliest days of photography. What I'd like to do now is to think differently, to think about whether we think differently these days about remembrance and the act of remembering, especially in an age where perhaps religion and religious ritual is not central to most people's lives, and about the impermanence and transience of digital data. We live in the age of the digital photographic archive. You only have to think about Facebook and Instagram, for example, or the thousands of photographs that we keep on our computers. So the digital image is disposable and transient. And I'd like to really think about whether the ephemeral nature of digital photography lacks the necessary materiality and dimensionality for a photographic portrait whose purpose is for memorial and for remembrance. What are the consequences of losing something so intangible and losing something with no physical qualities? And I'd like to really take some time to, in advance of the Memorial Photo Booth workshop, to really take some time to consider the significance of the photographic memorial. And I'm going to put some prompts on a slide in just a second for us to think about. And then really over to you. I'd like, if there are any questions you have about my work or the photographic memorial. And one thing I was also thinking about before we do that is very much in the context of climate change and COP26, is there a broader role for the photographic memorial in the virtual space so that it maintains its purpose as a form of remembrance or a reminder of someone who's died, or a memento mori perhaps. But does it perhaps make way for a more sustainable alternative to cemeteries and graveyards where space is at a premium? So there has to be a conversation about what we do with our dead in the future and how we remember them. So with the memorial photo booth, I know that some of you here have signed up for the workshop, which is going to start in a minute, but I'd like us to perhaps think about some reflections of the memorial photo and what it is to engage in having a memorial photograph taken, how you want to be remembered, why you want to be remembered, and whether it's important. What is the purpose of the memorial photograph? And is the photographic memorial able to capture your spirit, your soul? What is the legacy we leave behind when we've died? What's the best time in our lives to be photographed for a memorial photograph? When we're young or old, or at our peak health or peak beauty? When is the right time to have a photograph taken? What is your personal significance and value of the one image that will represent you in perpetuity? How much of this is vanity? Has social media had an impact on the way we perceive ourselves and our value in the same way that the invention of the daguerreotype had in the 19th century? We've been on an absolute roller coaster in the last 25 years since the invention of the internet. Everything is at lightning speed in terms of development. What would you wish to communicate in your own memorial photograph? Would you think of specific people? Will you try to communicate your satisfaction or dissatisfaction, regrets, bitterness, happiness, love? Is a still image better than a video? Again, thinking about the future memorial photograph, perhaps moving image will supersede the still image. What stories might your picture invoke for those observing it? What will others think? Do you care about this? Is what you wear important? Do you take your glasses on or off? Wear makeup, adornments, or absolutely natural? How much do you control the picture and how much is controlled by the photographer? So I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now. And if there are any, I can see a question, I think. So there's a question from Bentley here. Using family members saw these works. Yes, it's something I do think about, and I don't gain consent, and there's a difficult feeling, I have to say, about photographing in cemeteries, which I do with what I hope is the utmost discretion. And I tend to do it when nobody else is about, and I would never take a photograph of somebody's loved one who was there, you know, if they're visiting. I would never do that. So I try to exercise discretion and sensitivity. It hasn't happened yet that a living family member would see these, has seen these works, and actually they are sort of transformed to an extent that perhaps they're not recognised. When that happens, are there any other questions? Really happy to take any if you want to write them in the chat or. Okay, so I have come to the end of my presentation, and I'm going to now dive into the photo. Tamsin says it's and also quite a strain to think about absolutely right. And I think it makes us read a photograph perhaps differently when we are thinking about having our own photograph taken. So thank you very much. I'm absolutely delighted that everybody here has taken the time out to listen to me talking about myself and my practice. I'm very happy to do that, and I'm very happy to look forward to meeting some individuals in the photo booth session, in which I will take a screenshot of Head and Shoulders and take these images through the process I've spoken about, from still image to projection through the camera obscura and back to print. So I'm very much looking forward to that. Thank you very much, and goodbye.
Thank you, Bea.
Thank you.